What Ukraine has done over the course of the past several days aren't acts of war. These are acts of terrorism. Ukrainian Operation Spiderweb, this drone attack on 4 Russian strategic bomber bases. There is no Ukrainian position. People need to understand that right now. There's no such thing as a Ukrainian position. So stop blaming the CIA. They're only doing what they're supposed to do. Well, let's talk about a couple things first. First of all,
Russia's updated 2024 nuclear doctrine isn't just policy, it's a warning. Even if you use conventional weapons, if you target their nuclear command or delivery systems, Russia now considers that grounds for a nuclear response. No nukes have to be launched first. It's about protecting capability, not just reacting to destruction. That's a terrifyingly low threshold for escalation.
Let's talk about Russia's nuclear doctrine, because this is the scary part of this conversation. Russia's nuclear doctrine, as modified in 2024, sets certain red lines. And one of the red lines is an attack by conventional forces against Russia's strategic nuclear forces of bombers, missiles, command and control, etc. Just simply using conventional forces to target Russia's strategic nuclear infrastructure is a red line that can trigger a nuclear retaliation. The second is when a non-nuclear power is supported in a conventional attack against Russia that threatens its existential existence by nuclear partners, then Russia will view that as an attack by the nuclear partners on Russia and use nuclear weapons as well.
Ukraine's drone strikes under Operation Spiderweb didn't just hit military targets, they crossed multiple red lines defined in Russia's nuclear doctrine. This wasn't a symbolic gesture. These were strategic bomber bases, nuclear infrastructure. Under Russian policy, that's justification for a nuclear response. In simpler terms, we're playing nuclear chicken without a brake pedal.
And so the Ukrainian Operation Spiderweb, this drone attack on 4 Russian strategic bomber bases, violates at least 2, probably more, of the red lines of Russia's nuclear doctrine. I mean, we're playing with fire here, because with different leadership, people that didn't have the spine of Putin, people who didn't have the foresight or the patience or the resilience of Putin, we'd probably all be dead now. That's how serious this is. We're talking about global nuclear exchange, the total annihilation of the world. So this isn't a joke. This is as real as it gets. And it gets even more real when you realize that Ukraine couldn't have done this without the assistance of either Great Britain, the United States, or both.
The claim here is explosive. Ukraine's operation was likely coordinated with or even led by British intelligence. And while the US may not have been officially involved, previous training and relationships suggest indirect complicity. If true, this turns a regional skirmish into a near-direct confrontation between nuclear powers. It's a proxy war with real-world consequences.
The likelihood is that it is the British who took the lead on the planning and execution of this operation. This has all sorts of British fingerprints on it. But, you know, the United States, up until Trump's recent election, the United States was heavily involved in training Ukrainian special operators and intelligence service members in guerrilla warfare, unconventional warfare, covert direct action, all the things that are happening here. And I think it's very possible that there's rogue elements within the CIA's paramilitary and international operations divisions who have maintained connectivity with their Ukrainian counterparts. either directly or indirectly using the British as a cutout, but that there's American fingerprints on this attack, even if Donald Trump didn't order it, even if Donald Trump wasn't aware of it. The fact that Russia House in the CIA's operations directorate, was involved is problematic for world peace. The British are just, I think, are emerging as some of the worst people in the world. They don't care about international peace and security. These are very petty people who, Americans need to stop viewing the British as.
This is a provocative accusation that British-backed Ukrainian operations amount to terrorism, not warfare. The speaker is drawing a sharp moral line, one that separates battlefield conduct from clandestine attacks on civilian or nuclear targets. If the international community sees these as terror acts, it reframes NATO's image entirely, from defender to provocateur.
Our fellow Democrats, the Great Britain is a terrorist nation because what Ukraine has done over the course of the past several days aren't acts of war. These are acts of terrorism. Terrorism, that's it. And I'll get to that in a second. But the British are literally putting the survival of the world at risk because of their petty differences with Vladimir Putin in Russia. And America should control this instantly, but we're not. That's a sign of American weakness there. The good news is when the Russians take a look at what's happening, they look at the big picture. The big picture is they're winning this war decisively. I mean, there isn't a single front in which they're losing. Everything the Ukrainians did, from blowing up 2 trains to attacking, carrying out these drone attacks, to their attack on the Crimea bridge today, are terrorist operations. That's it. That's all Ukraine can do right now, is basically cheap tricks. Go out and carry out some fancy covert operation. Looks good on paper. Did it impact the direction of the war? Ask the Ukrainian soldiers on the front line. And the answer is no. They're getting slaughtered. They're getting pushed back. They're losing territory. They have no reserves. They have no ammunition. They're running out of everything.
According to this view, Ukraine's provocations are tactical. They're not about winning the war militarily, but about forcing Russia into a disproportionate response. The strategy: trigger outrage, shift global perception, and collapse any peace talks. It's not a battlefield strategy. It's an information war gamble with the survival of negotiations on the line.
Ask the Ukrainian negotiators in Istanbul, because everything the Ukrainians have been doing is designed to disrupt these negotiations. The goal and objective of Ukraine was to get Russia to pull out of the negotiations or carry out a massive retaliation on such a scope and scale that Ukraine said, we can't possibly be expected to negotiate with these animals. Look what they've done. Russia didn't do any of that. Didn't do anything. Russia sent their negotiation team. It sat down with the Ukrainians for an hour and a half. They exchanged a memorandum, agreed to return 6,000 bodies and other prisoner swaps, and put their markers on the table. And the Ukrainians now don't know what to do. Neither does the West, because these talks were supposed to end. Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal flew to Kiev and conspired with Ukraine to set this up, to have the package of sanctions there waiting, so when Russia fumbled at the negotiations, they could come in and get Trump to put the hammer down. But now Trump's been handed something. What does he do? He can't say the Russians aren't cooperating. He can't say the Russians aren't playing the game. So he has to continue this process, and it's impossible to continue the process with Lindsey Graham's sanctions going forward. So the Russians have played this brilliantly.
Despite intense provocation, Russia showed restraint and returned to the negotiation table. That's the narrative here. While Ukraine tried to bait them into overreacting, Russia stayed composed. The result? A diplomatic win that leaves the West flat-footed. In this framing, it's not just about who controls the battlefield. It's about who controls the moral narrative.
This is genius, diplomatic genius, operational genius on the part of the Russians. Yes, we can say this is an intelligence failure. I mean, every time you have an action of this sort take place, it's an intelligence failure. But I would also say the people that say that don't know a goddamn thing about intelligence. I'm just going to be honest with you. Medinsky, who is the Russian negotiator in Istanbul, has come out and talked about I think it was a comment made by Yermak, who said to Medinsky, "You guys have it easy."
This seemingly casual comment from a Ukrainian negotiator reveals something massive. Ukraine isn't acting alone. The statement implies that Western powers, including the US, Britain, and NATO, are calling the shots. So when people talk about Ukraine as a sovereign state, this quote rips the mask off. If true, then all decisions coming out of Kyiv are essentially echoes of foreign agendas.
You only have one boss. We have three. And first of all, that statement alone makes it clear that Ukraine is not a sovereign state. So we need to stop speaking about a sovereign Ukraine. And therefore, that exposes everything the United States, Keith Kellogg, Trump, the Europeans, NATO is doing as a fraud, because they keep postulating as if Ukraine is a sovereign state capable of making sovereign decisions. Ukraine is not. I did a documentary coming up on 3 years now ago, Agent Zelensky, where I outlined the case.
The claim that Zelensky is essentially a British asset paints a very different picture of Ukraine's leadership. It suggests he's not only under influence, but under supervision. The idea of a British handler being sent to shadow a sitting president during peace talks should raise alarms. If he needs monitoring, what does that say about who's really steering Ukraine's war and diplomacy?
He was a construct of British intelligence, and he is. I mean, we saw that when he went to Istanbul, how quickly the British dispatched Mr. Powell to be his babysitter, because Zelensky can't be trusted to engage in negotiations without a British handler there to monitor what comes to him and what he says. But the United States is also, the one. Keith Kellogg says the three players are going to come in. I thought Trump was just a guy who was interested in peace. Why now he's a player? That means that there's American interests here, not just Ukrainian and Russian interests. This isn't about melding the two term sheets together. It's about the United States dictating an outcome that's beneficial solely to the United States.
That Ukraine has no independent voice in this war. Everything it says or does is just the NATO position rebranded. That reframes the entire conflict. It's not just Russia versus Ukraine. It's Russia versus a Western military alliance using Ukraine as a mouthpiece. That drastically changes how we interpret sovereignty, diplomacy, and even war crimes.
There is no Ukrainian position. People need to understand that right now. There's no such thing as a Ukrainian position. There's a NATO position that's parroted by Ukraine, and the United States has played one of these passive roles where they pretend to be sympathetic to Russia, but at the end of the day, they're always gravitating towards the NATO/Ukrainian position. Russia has been consistent from day one. I don't know why Keith Kellogg is confused. I don't know why Donald Trump's confused. I mean, Steve Witkoff has been accurate in portraying the Russian position that has been relayed to him from the very beginning of the U.S.-Russian dialogue. Trump himself got off the phone with Putin, where I think Putin made it pretty clear what the Russian objectives were and how Russia sought to get there and what the Russian conditions are. None of this should take anybody by surprise. Trump, I think, lives in a fantasy world where he believes that he has far more leverage over Russia than he does. I mean, we know that this fantasy is fed by people like Scott Bessent, his Secretary of Treasury, who has said even before he became the Secretary of Treasury that we know the secret of Russia, and the Russians know that we know the secret, and we can break them at any time. There is no secret to Russia.
In blunt terms, the speaker claims Russia has cracked the code on how to outmaneuver the West. Sanctions haven't broken them. If anything, they've adapted. Meanwhile, Western economies like Germany's are tanking. The narrative flips. Russia isn't the one collapsing. Instead, it's the so-called collective West that's stuck in a losing game it no longer knows how to play.
Russia's kicking America's butt. They're kicking NATO's butt. They're kicking Europe's butt. They know the secret of the West, the collective West, and they've solved it a long time ago. It doesn't mean that things are easy for the Russians. None of this has been easy. It's been very bloody. They've suffered numerous casualties. And they have, had to undertake um, dramatic systemic changes in how they operate to overcome sanctions. But when the sanctions came in, instead of having an economy that went into recession, there was reduced growth, but it stabilized at around 2.2%. Today, it's up to 4.8 and growing. How do you do that? How do you strangle the Russian economy and have it grow? Meanwhile, the countries doing the strangling are seeing their company. Germany's economy is on the verge of collapse. There was just a report today about how bad things are going for the Germans. None of the European economies are doing well. And every time they sanction Russia, it gets worse. This is why Vladimir Putin, who's normally very diplomatic in his use of language, said in a contest of idiots, the European Union comes in second. They're not even good enough to come in first. That's how bad they are. And it's true. Trump, I'm confused sometimes by him because, he has to be better briefed. To give you an example of the stupidity of Donald Trump, and I'm trying to be nice here. I apologize for using that term because I don't want you to get in trouble with your YouTube community. But you can't say that Trump is behaving in an intelligent fashion here.
Here's the core issue. Trump publicly criticized Putin without knowing that Ukraine had just attempted to assassinate him. That's not just a gap in intel, it's a failure in basic situational awareness. When leaders speak without understanding the facts, it isn't just embarrassing, it's dangerous. Especially when nuclear-armed states are involved, and one wrong word could trigger escalation.
He does a spontaneous press conference where he calls Vladimir Putin crazy. I don't know what's going through his mind. I don't know what's going on, and on and on and on and on. And then the reporter asks a follow-on question. You are aware that the Ukrainians tried to assassinate Putin. Well, I didn't know that happened. I guess that might have had an impact. No kidding, Mr. President. You who have promised to wipe a certain unnamed nation off the earth if an assassination attempt came in your way. I'm talking about Iran, Mr. Marandi, but I'm not accusing Iran. I'm saying that the president has thrown out those accusations. He says, I would respond drastically. We would annihilate them. We would wipe them out. All right. If that non-existent event causes that kind of emotion, what would you do if you had 500 drones swarm the presidential helicopter trying to kill Vladimir Putin while he was on Russian soil? And the answer is you take out the people that attacked you. But in addition to that, over a course of a couple of days, the Ukrainians launched over 2,000 drones into Russia, 50% of whom were targeted civilian targets, not military targets, civilian targets. What is Russia supposed to do in a situation like that? Russia has responded with overwhelming force against exclusively military targets. To the extent that there is civilian damage in Ukraine, it's because Ukrainians have yet to master how to use air defense systems. There's things they have to do to avoid being suppressed by the Russians, which means that they're firing without adequate radar control. So the missiles go dumb and they hit civilian infrastructure. It's exclusively Ukrainian air defense is doing damage to civilian targets. Everybody knows it. The Ukrainians know it. We know it. Everybody knows it. And the last thing I'll say on this is the hypocrisy of Donald Trump, or the stupidity of Donald Trump, is manifest when he claims that America is just sitting there. We don't have any vested interest. Who the hell targeted those drones, Mr. President? Who targeted those drones?
This is perhaps the sharpest accusation, that the U.S. is pretending to be neutral while actively participating in the conflict. Surveillance aircraft, weapons, shipments, covert targeting support. These aren't the moves of a bystander. If we're in the game, we should admit it, because hiding behind neutrality while escalating tensions only makes everything more dangerous and dishonest.
Why are you flying U.S. Navy intelligence collection platforms off the Russian coast in the Black Sea? Why? If you're this neutral player, why are American aircraft flying into Poland loaded with military equipment? Because you're not an innocent observer. You're an active participant disguised. You are a wolf in sheep's clothing. And that's the role the United States is playing. Either the president is truly one of the dumbest men in the world, or he's one of the most disingenuous men in the world, or he's both. But let me just push back a little bit on General Flynn. I wish I could talk to him, because I'd say, General Flynn, when you were in Iraq and you were doing the whole JSOC fusion thing with McChrystal, did you know everything the CIA was doing? It's a rhetorical question, General, because you didn't, because you wore a uniform. and you weren't in the little CIA bubble.
This seemingly casual comment from a Ukrainian negotiator reveals something massive. Ukraine isn't acting alone. The statement implies that Western powers, including the US, Britain, and NATO, are calling the shots. So when people talk about Ukraine as a sovereign state, this quote rips the mask off. If true, then all decisions coming out of Kyiv are essentially echoes of foreign agendas.
The paramilitary bubble. There were things the CIA was doing in Iraq that you had no clue of. And to be honest, the director of the CIA had no clue of. You want to know why? You know this, General. I mean, this is what gets me about it, because this is very disingenuous. Once the CIA receives direction to do something, it's hands off. And until there's explicitly ordered to cease and desist, don't spend another dime, withdraw all personnel, drop everything.
The claim that Zelensky is essentially a British asset paints a very different picture of Ukraine's leadership. It suggests he's not only under influence, but under supervision. The idea of a British handler being sent to shadow a sitting president during peace talks should raise alarms. If he needs monitoring, what does that say about who's really steering Ukraine's war and diplomacy?
And even then, the CIA doesn't obey its orders, because once they get going, it becomes a sense. Read the founding instructions about CIA's Special Activities Division. They called it something different back then, but back in 1947 or whenever the CIA was created, the Special Activities Staff was created for deniable covert operations to achieve regime change and all this. And it meant that they could lie to the US government to achieve this because it's deniable. Hey guys, when you create Frankenstein, why are you upset when Frankenstein does what Frankenstein does?
Here, the speaker argues that Ukraine has no independent voice in this war. Everything it says or does is just the NATO position rebranded. That reframes the entire conflict. It's not just Russia versus Ukraine. It's Russia versus a Western military alliance using Ukraine as a mouthpiece. That drastically changes how we interpret sovereignty, diplomacy, and even war crimes.
The CIA should be disbanded, eliminated, and frankly speaking, 9/10 of their case officers should be investigated and put in jail because they're gangsters. They're criminals, and they can't be trusted. They're not good Americans. They're actually the worst kind of Americans, because they believe they operate above the law, that the Constitution doesn't apply to them, because they've been given a mandate to lie, to cheat, to steal. Literally, that's what they do for a living. I remember, I was recruited by the CIA's paramilitary people. And, the guy who talked to me, Mick Flynn, that's not his name. It's one of the many aliases that he used, but he was a covert operator that went back, started out as a Green Beret in Vietnam, then switched over to SOG, got involved in the CIA's murder programs, and then went on, and he was pushing Iran-Contra, and he was going into Honduras and setting up bases, working with the Contras. He did all that. He got involved in doing some other stupid stuff. And then in the lead up to the Gulf War, he set up the CIA Special Activities people did a program in Iraq before Desert Storm, where they had these Iraqi operatives in place in case an American pilot got shot down. And the operative's job was sort of to replicate what happened in World War II, to create safe houses so these pilots could be brought in and then move from safe house to safe house, safe house, till the CIA could get them out.
In blunt terms, the speaker claims Russia has cracked the code on how to outmaneuver the West. Sanctions haven't broken them. If anything, they've adapted. Meanwhile, Western economies like Germany's are tanking. The narrative flips. Russia isn't the one collapsing. Instead, it's the so-called collective West that's stuck in a losing game it no longer knows how to play.
He set that program up, and he monitored it from within Syria. After the war, he got involved in regime change operations in Iraq, initially lying to everybody, including me. But ultimately, everybody knew what they were up to. But he basically interviewed me, and the interview was going well until he said, you're going to have to learn to lie. I said, well, I understand deniability. He said, no, you're going to have to learn to lie about everything, everything into everybody.
Here's the core issue. Trump publicly criticized Putin without knowing that Ukraine had just attempted to assassinate him. That's not just a gap in intel, it's a failure in basic situational awareness. When leaders speak without understanding the facts, it isn't just embarrassing, it's dangerous, especially when nuclear-armed states are involved and one wrong word could trigger escalation.
And he said, we don't think you can do that. And I said, I think you're right. I mean, and that was sort of the end of that process. I mean, he didn't condemn me for it, but he's just like, you can't be a Boy Scout. You can't be, an honest person here. You're getting into a game where everything's a lie. Everything is a lie. Everything. And I'm like, well, gosh, I don't know if I want to play that game anymore. But that's the CIA. That's the reality of it. These people were ordered. I just want to remind people, General Flynn and everybody's outraged. Larry Wilkerson's everybody's outraged that they attacked nuclear bombers. You do know it's not the first time they did this. You know that CIA trained unconventional warfare teams penetrated Russia and made it to the outskirts of Ingalls base, where the nuclear bombers are, where all the bombers come before they bomb Ukraine. When they're put on, the conventional stuff, and launched their attack against Ingalls Air Base, which again triggered the whole thing. That attack is one of the things that caused the Russians to change their doctrine, because that attack could only have taken place, and did take place, with the assistance of the CIA and the British. That's it. The President of the United States ordered that attack.
This is perhaps the sharpest accusation, that the U.S. is pretending to be neutral while actively participating in the conflict. Surveillance aircraft, weapons, shipments, covert targeting support. These aren't the moves of a bystander. If we're in the game, we should admit it, because hiding behind neutrality while escalating tensions only makes everything more dangerous and dishonest.
Did Donald Trump rescind that order? No. The official policy of the United States under Biden was to achieve the strategic defeat of Russia. Has Donald Trump rescinded that order? No. So stop blaming the CIA. They're only doing what they're supposed to do.